and thank you for joining us. I'm Wilson Stribling. Welcome to another edition of At Issue, where we discuss and debate the critical issues facing the state of Mississippi and how these issues impact you. And we want you to share your opinions and your comments with us. Just go to facebook.com/MPB Online News. On Twitter, our handle is @MPB News. Also visit our webpage, mpbonline.org/issue. At Issue tonight, charter schools. They're new to Mississippi. A charter school is an alternate public school that enters into a contract with the state. The contract gives the school the power to operate on its own, to make decisions on its faculty, budget, and curriculum for students to achieve specific educational goals. State lawmakers paved the way for charter schools when legislation was passed 3 years ago. Any student can attend a charter school who lives in the district where the school is located, and any student who lives in a C, D, or F rated district can attend a charter school. The schools are funded by state tax dollars that public school districts receive each year. There's now a legal challenge to charter schools taking public money intended to educate individual students. We'll have more discussion on that in a moment. Currently, there are only 3 charter schools in Mississippi. Midtown Public Charter School in Jackson is operated locally by Midtown Partners Incorporated. Reimagine Prep and Smilo Prep, also in Jackson, are operated by Republic Schools Incorporated out of Nashville, Tennessee. Both Republic Schools and Midtown Partners are nonprofit organizations. We spent a morning at Smilo Prep to see what a charter school is like. MPB's Mark Rigsby reports.
Our kids coming through our program experience extremely deep academic gains pretty early on within their experience and are prepared for college when they graduate from, or are on the trajectory to be prepared for college when they graduate from high school, and generally go beyond their grade level heading into high school. And there are a lot of different design elements for that, but some of them are having a bit longer of a school day, having an intense focus on literacy, using data to drive instruction, having an academic approach to character education so that kids are not just learning skills, but they're learning the right way to do things and really developing themselves as people. We decided to come to Jackson because we wanted to go somewhere where the need is extremely deep and the demand is very high. So in Jackson and in Mississippi generally, kids have some of the lowest odds of going from the bottom to the top. And so we came here because kids here in particular need better options. Kids intrinsically should like school. I think the problem with the way that we've designed school is that we've been so unimaginative about how we talk about and think about school. The subjects have all the same names. The school days are generally run from the same time. We even read some of the same books that we did 50 years ago. Classrooms in general haven't changed that much since I was in school, my parents were in school, or even their parents were in school. And so I think we're afraid to change schools to make them more compelling for kids. But the minute we start to ask the question, what do our kids need now, not just what have we done in the past, and what can ignite our kids' passion for learning, it's actually not that hard to get kids to really care about what they're doing.
All 3 strategies. Our first person is going to be Scholars meet me in the start. Beat that time. All right.
I think you see the gains less dramatically early, but you see them sustained over time. And so my prediction is, in year 1, you see our students outperforming the schools in the same neighborhood that they come from. That's the prediction. In year 2, they outperform probably the city. and some of our schools and some of our subjects will outperform the state. By year 3, they're consistently outperforming the state. By year 4, they'll be outperforming districts like Madison and DeSoto.
This year we received notification that we would have to give the charter schools $595,000 for 227 of our scholars that went to charter schools. And so we made those adjustments accordingly. And going forward, the anticipation is as those charter schools take on more students, then we have to make the adjustments as well. So I think that our responsibility in JPS is to make sure that we are innovative in our educational approaches and providing the educational environment for our scholars so that they know that we are the first and best choice. So we're doing a lot of innovative things going forward, which include our academies and redesign of our middle schools, signing bonuses and merit pay for some of our schools, as well as a very concentrated effort on professional development for our teachers, and so that our scholars also will continue to enjoy enrichment and extracurricular activities for our system.
Gupta says charter schools should not be seen as working against the public school system.
The public school system needs to thrive and it needs to exist. And anybody who talks about dismantling the public school system is reckless and naive about where we are, especially in the state of Mississippi with the levels of poverty that Mississippi has right now. And I say this as somebody who went through largely public schools as a kid and went to a public university for college. So we need to support our public schools. And that's part of the reason why I work in public charters, is that part of, if the public school system continues on its trajectory, it will continue to, like, in general, there are some good public school systems and some rough public school systems. There are great public schools and some rough public schools. But in general, if we continue on the trajectory, especially the trajectory that we're on in Mississippi, without some kind of innovation and real tension within the system around creative solutions to change outcomes for kids, then the public school system itself will suffer. And we already see that in evidence of Jackson. We're losing thousands of kids over the past few years before we even got to charter schools. So people look at charter schools and say, well, you're gonna take kids as if they belong to the system. And what I believe is we all need to work together to bring as many people back into the system as possible. And instead of viewing charter schools as somehow outside of the system, just view them as another tool within the system in Jackson to help solve this problem of flight from the city, underperformance for kids, and just get to the point where instead of us being fourth worst in the country for economic mobility for kids, we go to a point where Jackson is the best place to grow up as a kid, and that you have the best outcomes. You can escape poverty. It doesn't matter where you grow up. That's what we need to be focused on.
Smilo Prep currently is only 5th grade, but will add a higher grade each year up to 8th grade. Mark Rigsby, MPB News.
Republic received a $9.6 million federal grant for startup costs for its facilities in Tennessee and Mississippi. Local supporters of Republic schools include former corporate CEO Jim Barksdale, former Mississippi Supreme Court Justice Reuben Anderson, and former Mississippi Development Authority Executive Director Leland Speed. Smilo Prep's namesake, former Playtex CEO Joel Smilo, donated $1 million. Mississippi Charter Schools Act of 2013 also created the Charter School Authorizer Board for oversight. Tomi Carden was appointed by Lieutenant Governor Tate Reeves to serve as board chairman. Carden shares his thoughts about charter schools, present and future.
The purpose is to provide an opportunity for children to have an excellent educational experience by operating autonomously. That is, independently and on their own as much as possible, and to give them the freedom to employ techniques and standards that will ensure a quality educational experience for children. We're looking for compliance with the charter, the contract that we have in place with the charter school. And in that contract, there's an academic performance framework, and there are other requirements set forth in that contract. We're looking to make sure that the charter school has complied with every term of that contract, and hopefully we're going to see results from an academic standpoint that benefit the children in those schools. There's a core set of requirements, and that basically is built around the academic performance framework that we require from charters. Then there are portions such as you have to have a transportation plan. You have to have some type of food plan. You have to have disciplinary procedures, things of that nature that have to be incorporated into the contract. So it really is a combination of core requirements plus some detailed requirements. What we've observed in terms of the teaching methodology and the approach that's taken with the students, it's very impressive in both charters. They're different, but both approaches seem to be effective when you go and you observe the classroom setting and see what's taking place. Well, I think that charters provide an opportunity for public schools in general to have a different educational experience to see if there is a better way of doing it. And if there is a better way or there are better methods that are working in the charter school, then why not export those to the other public schools in the district and let the rising tide lift all boats? I would hope that that would be one of the goals that we could pursue as a result of having public charter schools. The law requires that there be a 5-year contract with a charter school. And so this is not a short-term type of deal. This is a 5-year contract that we enter into with the charters, and so we will be able to review over the course of a period of time to see what's working and what's not working. There are some challenges down the road that we need to pay attention to. One thing we've seen is that, first of all, there needs to be more information, accurate information, shared with parents and the public about charter schools and what the law actually does allow and doesn't allow. We're beyond the point of debating the policy about charter schools. They're here to stay. The law is in place. And so we need to educate one another about what that law requires. I think we need to think about how to become effective partners in the public education community with charter schools rather than trying to fight one another. Because our goal is to provide the best educational opportunities for our kids that we can, and we should be about finding ways that we can partner to do that rather than fighting with one another and not providing the opportunity as a result of that we could. Another thing we need to look at is we need to provide educational opportunities for those who would want to operate charter schools and help them understand the application process and what they need to provide to us in order to prove that they have a good chance at success in terms of educational opportunities. So there are a variety of things we can do, and I think that we need to work diligently to educate one another about charters and to find ways that we can weave public charter schools into the fabric of our public education community in an effective way.
The Southern Poverty Law Center has filed a lawsuit claiming the way charter schools are funded is unconstitutional. The group says $1.8 million from the public school system went to the charter schools in Jackson last year. MPB's Desiree Frazier talked with State Representative Jarvis Dortch of Hinds County and Marilyn Young from Southern Echo, an African-American leadership, education, and training organization, about charter schools and the lawsuit.
Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm going to start with Marilyn. Tell us, what do you think about charter schools?
I think that charter schools are bad for Mississippi because they are set up in a different structure than the traditional public school. I think that the traditional public schools will eventually be destroyed in the sense that we know as a traditional public school now, based on more and more charters being opened in the state of Mississippi, because it drains the funding from the traditional, already underfunded public schools.
Well, when you talk about having school choice, do you think that's something that parents should have, an alternative public school that's going to give their children the education that they feel they're not getting in the traditional public school?
Well, I don't think they've had that first choice of having a quality education in public school for most of the students in Mississippi. Take JPS. Since 2009, JPS has been underfunded by the state by close to $100 million. And that's $100 million that could have paid for more buses, more teachers, allow for interventions to help students that may need mental health, may have mental health needs. So we haven't tackled that first end yet before we start talking about school choice. I think school choice is a way to allow people to not be responsible for the fact that they have failed public schools for so long. You just change the conversation instead of talking about why are our public schools so underfunded.
So we got two issues kind of going on here. You're saying support public schools more, give them more money, but people also want alternatives. Where do you stand? You mentioned funding. Why is funding to you a problem?
Because like Representative Jarvis said, for decades, Mississippi has underfunded public education pretty much its entirety since education came into existence. Now in 1997, they passed the MAEP funding formula for it, but it's only been fully funded one time. And after it was fully funded, and that was during an election year, after it was fully funded, they started cutting year after year after year. And so the little bit of money that you did get for a boost for that little bit of time, it was already stripped right back.
We've got a lawsuit that is that says that the funding mechanism right now is unconstitutional because it's taking money away from public schools. Your feeling about that, Jarvis?
Well, I think the lawsuit is appropriate. What you have with our charter school program right now is charter schools are able to draw local dollars, our property taxes that we pay here in Jackson or in Hinds County. They go to a private company and they're able to use it, and there's no, the citizens of Jackson or Hinds County do not have any supervision of that spending, and neither does the State Department of Education. So you set up a separate school district that isn't accountable to any of the voters who are paying these taxes. So that's directly in conflict with the Constitution.
Marilyn, your feelings?
I agree. Same difference. I mean, no accountability is there. In local school districts, you do have a local school board that the community elect to represent them. So if you have problems, you have a representative that you can talk to. Inside of the charter process, the only thing that's public about it is it uses public taxpayers' money. And you don't have any say-so, and that's not appropriate.
But what about the money following the child? Do you agree with that? Because that's actually what's happening.
I don't agree with it simply because the state is not providing enough money for the traditional public schools. If they want to fund charter schools, if you fund them, but you should also fund the traditional public schools because they're the first responsibility to us, the traditional public schools, but the state is not doing that. And this is another way to divert funds from that.
Yeah, and take the first year of the charter schools here in Jackson, you had 2 schools set up and about 250 students, maybe a little less than that. That was just from local taxpayers. JPS had to write a check for about $600,000 to those 2 schools. And if JPS still had 28,000 students to take care of, so they still had the same amount of buses, same amount of air conditioning they had to provide students, same amount of teachers. Their costs did not go down for those 250 students, but they lost $600,000. So you're really hurting the entire school district. And it's great, maybe great for those 250 students, but there's still 28,000 in Jackson that are not getting the services that they need.
Now, Jarvis, isn't that how the law was written, though?
Yeah, that's exactly how the law was written. Yeah, so I mean, the state is getting what they wanted, but it's not appropriate for, if you're actually caring about all of the students in Jackson and want to see all of them have the opportunity to succeed, you should put together a law or a program that benefits everyone.
Well, on that note, I want to thank you both, Marilyn Young with Southern Echo and Representative Jarvis Dortch, for joining us today. Thank you so much for your insight.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for having us.
We are joined now by Rachel Cantu, Executive Director of Mississippi First. She is also the board chair of the Mississippi Charter Schools Association. Also, Mike Hurst, who is director of the Mississippi Justice Institute. Mike, Rachel, thank you both for being on At Issue with us.
Thank you.
Let me start with you, Rachel. Why are charter schools good for Mississippi?
The data on charter schools has grown over the last several years that we've had charter schools. We've had them in the U.S. since 1991. And what the data shows, the highly rigorous studies, is that charter schools are particularly good for students of color and low-income students. And those are two populations of students that we have a lot of here in Mississippi, and students who struggle a lot here in Mississippi. We know that if Mississippi wants to be first in education, wants to improve on our rankings, we have to do a better job of educating low-income kids and kids of color. And charter schools are one method of providing an excellent opportunity for an education for those students.
Mike, you're an attorney, and you were aware of a lawsuit that's out there, quite aware of this lawsuit that would threaten the existence of charter schools as we know them now in Mississippi. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, there's an out-of-state group called the Southern Poverty Law Center. They have a chapter here in Mississippi. They filed a lawsuit back in July suing the governor, the Department of Education, and Jackson Public Schools, arguing that the Charter School Act is unconstitutional, saying that the funding mechanism for the Charter School Act violates two different sections of the Constitution. And it basically comes down to the problem they have with it is it's not under local superintendent control and not under the state superintendent control. But the unintended consequences here are, if the Southern Poverty Law Center is successful in this lawsuit, there are a lot of things that are going to happen. The Mississippi School for Math and Science up in Columbus area, they could close. The Mississippi School for the Arts in Brookhaven, they could close. All these things, all these schools around the state, agriculture schools, Mississippi School for the Deaf and Blind, all these schools around the state that are not under the control of the local superintendent, if this lawsuit is successful, could lose their funding.
What about the argument that charter schools siphon funding away from standard public schools, that funding that could go to these schools that are having a hard time is being sent to charter schools instead, along with the students?
Well, I think it's a red herring. Yes, funding does move with the child, but here's the thing. If, say, the Jackson Public School, whatever it is, has 100 kids, if 5 of those kids go to the charter school, the money that was associated with those 5 children go with the children. So now the Jackson Public School is only educating 95 children. So yeah, money did leave, but they still have the same proportional amount of money to educate those 95 children, and the charter school has the money to educate those 5 children. So money does leave the traditional public school, but they receive the same money that they would have had charter schools not been there, based upon per pupil amounts.
Rachel, what do you make of that criticism?
Well, I would say that money belongs to children. Money belongs to children. It's for the purpose of the education of children. And where the children are being educated is where the money should go. All
right, let's talk about what the Republican leadership and the legislature brought up just this week about funding, the funding formula, the Mississippi Adequate Education Program. And they brought in an outside outfit to examine the funding formula and perhaps reformulate it. Rachel, do you think that poses any threat to charter schools? Is it potentially a good thing for future charter schools? What's your take?
Well, I don't think that examination will have a differential effect on charter schools than it will have on traditional public schools, and here's why. Charter schools currently get MAEP funds. They currently get every dollar that traditional public schools get. So they have parity, basically, in the dollars that they get on a per pupil basis from the state. So examining the funding formula and changing it, it's not really about charter schools versus traditional public schools. It's about every public school child and every public school dollar. The way that the funding formula works is completely separate from the way that charter schools are authorized. So when you're looking at the funding formula, you're truly just looking at the dollars and how they flow, as opposed to the authorization process, which is who opens charter schools, how many charter schools they get, how many children they serve, etc. So I'm not expecting the formula change to have a differential effect, as I said, on charter schools in terms of are they going to get less money, etc. Right now they have parity, and I would expect the legislature to keep it at parity for both traditional public schools and charter schools.
Rachel Cantu, Executive Director of Mississippi First and Board Chair of the Mississippi Charter Schools Association, and Mike Hurst, Director of the Mississippi Justice Institute. Thank you both for joining us on At Issue.
Thank you.
For more information on charter schools, go to our website, mpbonline.org/issue. You can find the full-length interviews we conducted with guests on this program, as well as additional information and links. But for now, we're out of time. We invite you to join us next week for another edition of At Issue. Good night.